What's up YouTube, Mr. Lamacy here, and today we're going to be taking a look at damage and how damage works in Diablo 4. I'm sure a couple of you have seen this sheet a little bit and maybe seen some discussion around it, but I'm hoping to get a little bit more out there for all of you and hopefully to reach a few more people, because I have had people that have, oh my god, that have come to my channel and been asking all about it. So let's dive right in. And I'll also give a little bit of my opinion on some of these pieces. This is the current theory, understanding everything of how damage works in the game. A lot of testing right there by like Woody and others. So that's always really nice. I know Rax has been involved as well. Yeah. So all of these are taken from the glossary that's accessible in blah, 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 Lothric's database in Diablo4.cc, which Diablo4.cc is a great place to go find a lot of just like all the affixes and the quest and all of this, so you can just look for all sorts of stuff, right? What are all the affixes? How are they rolling? Where are the different roles, etc. Really great information. But let's dive into what it is, right? Damage in Diablo 4 and why certain affixes are so important versus what is not important for each of your different characters. So here is the formula right here. Your main stat times your big bucket of all the additives, we'll get into that, times vulnerable, times crit damage, and then times your global multipliers. Aspects, passive, anything that has an X next to it, right? So that's a multiplier right there. So what do we mean by this? For instance, X% damage, or anything that is, I mean, I can open it up and show you. Let me find, no, that's this. Here we go. Dealing, so the top one is a plus 20% non-physical damage. The bottom one is dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage to an enemy increases all damage you deal to them by 5% X for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. So if you have something with that, that is going to be that global multiplier. So you have those global multipliers, all of those X's. Then you have your main stat. So this is kind of pushing a little bit back towards the Diablo 3 style, where you want to stack main stat a little bit more because it is going to be increasing your damage. Attack speed bonus, because obviously you attack faster, you get higher DPS. And you can see they say it doesn't actually affect the numbers, but you will just attack faster. Then critical strike, and anything that has critical strike is going to all be factored into a single bucket, as people like to call it. Then you have all of the damage types, which is, I just like how this is like all the affixes is just like, right? Damage first, whatever. All of these get added together in one bucket, and then vulnerable damage is its own bucket. Now, what does this mean? This means that vulnerable damage is basically required. Everybody is going to need to run vulnerable. B, crit is also pretty required, because again, we'll open up paint and give the good sense of these buckets right here, right? So we've got our buckets. And it's like this. Pretend those are all the same size. And then, why is that so big? We'll go here. So we've got vulnerable. We've got crit. We've got main stat. We've got damage plus. And we've got damage times. Right? We've got these 5 buckets right here. Now, the more balanced that each of these buckets are, overall, the higher your damage. And the reason is because it's multiplying across here. So let's say that I have 100 to spend across all of it, right? If I have like 100% damage, Let's pretend this is at 100. Or I have 96% damage, and then 1, 1, 1, 1 in each of these buckets, 1% in each of these. Then I do 96 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, which is 96 damage, right? This is obviously just a very basic example. You wouldn't have it exactly like that, but just go with it. Then if you take this out and let's say you just make this 90 and even shift over just 6 of that to here, now you have 90 times 7, which is much higher than 96 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. Then if you shift out more from this and make this like 80 and make this 10, now you have 10 times 7 times 80, which is much higher. So again, the idea is if you balance your buckets, that is going to do way more overall than if you just stack in a single bucket or 2 buckets, right? So what that means is if you have damage versus CC, crowd control, and damage versus chilled, and damage versus close, and damage versus distant, and damage versus frozen, and damage versus slowed, and damage versus whatever, and you have all of this, all that's doing is adding into this damage plus bucket right here. So you may have, 300% in this bucket, but then have nothing with vulnerable damage, and then you're looking at an item and that item has 20% vulnerable damage but 30% damage versus burning, right? And your thought would be, 30% damage versus burning is worth more than 20% vulnerable, so I will take that. But it's not, because 30% damage versus burn just gets stacked on top of the rest of all your plus damage over here. So now you have 330. Whereas if you took that and put it over on here and you're vulnerable instead, it would be way better off, right? So you would actually gain a lot more damage. Also, vulnerable damage is times 1.2 because it's 20% more. So the difference here is and does actually add up in the long run to be a lot when you have things stacked more as such as opposed to stacking them across, right? Thus, the best things, of course, to be doing are 1, making sure that you're getting vulnerable damage and as much as you pretty much can, because you're not going to get a ton of big modifiers on all of that. So you want to get that up as much as you can. You're going to get a ton of damage versus blank. And this is going to be stuff that you're just going to get added in. And then additionally, this is where, like, here you can see plus 20% non-physical damage, right? And then I've also got the non-physical damage right there. Right here, 83.3% damage while healthy. So that's just add that into that same bucket. 27% vulnerable damage, that gets its own, that goes to the vulnerable bucket, so that's great. 81.5% critical strike damage, that goes to the crit bucket, so that's really great. 19% vulnerable damage, throw it on the vulnerable bucket. 58.7% damage to burning enemies, that goes right there back in that giant bucket that has all that stuff. 99.3% damage to crowd controlled enemies, again, throw that in that same bucket right here. So this bucket is just going to have a ton of damage in it. So you really don't need to focus on this bucket specifically with your items or places that you can get a different bucket in it. So when I say the other ones, you need to look at things like, again, vulnerable is just too important. You have to go vulnerable. Crit as well, and then the crit chance for that, because you're not going to have a ton there, so you want to be able to get this up as much as you can, this up as much as you can, because we're trying to balance these buckets as much as we can. All of the damage X is pretty much always going to be worth it, so that's where a lot of these glyphs come in, and why these glyphs are so important, because this is 10% increased a 10% X increased damage to burning enemies. This is 10% X increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies, or 20% increased to stunned or frozen. This is 10% increased damage after casting a defensive skill. That's for potion healing. This is up to 10% right there for vulnerable, right? So each one of these, you're not getting that 80%, 100% stacking on whatever. So you're getting those 10s, those 20s. So you want to stack up those multipliers as much as you can. This is stuff you're not really going to get on gear. I don't think any of the gear gives it. This is what will come in your skill tree and your Paragon board. So that's where you're going to get this. And then main stat, of course, is going to be, for me, it's int. And so here you can see I have 734 int, which is 73.4% increased skill damage, which is going to be pretty low and probably our lowest bucket overall when we get to the end there. So getting more int will always be helpful, but I will say with int you need to be careful because it is divided by 10, right? So I have 734 int, and that's increases skill damage by 73.4. So if you're dividing it all by 10 there, you can see that you'll very easily and very quickly be like, wait a second, if something gives 20 int, that's only 2% additional skill damage there. And at that point, maybe getting 30% additional main damage or something would actually be better. That's where you kind of have to, again, start doing all the math and figuring it all out if you want to get that into it. But overall, what this means is you want to be looking for gear that is hitting these sorts of buckets. This is critical strike damage. This is intelligence. It does have damage to close enemies, and then it has vulnerable damage, right? So like this right here is hitting 1 into each of those 4 buckets, gives us a nice split. On my rings here, I've got vulnerable damage, crit strike damage, crit chance. I've got vulnerable damage, damage crowd controlled, crit strike damage, crit chance, right? I'm going in and trying to spread as much as I can across all of those. And yeah, so this is essentially how damage is functioning in the game and why you just really need to start stacking these additional pieces. And if we look here, we can see my crit strike damage is 131%. My vulnerable damage is 222%. So getting crit strike damage up right now will be a big boost. Getting int up right now will be a big boost for me. The other damages are very high. It's, the 109 plus the 83 plus the 78.7, the damage versus closed, damage versus frozen, damage versus crowd controlled. Again, in the multi hundreds for all of that. So that's just, again, stuff that you will figure out over time as you're playing around. And here, where did I put that? Oh, there we go. Here, for the the last bit there, of course, the attack speed will be a final piece to it, right? Because, of course, if you attack faster and it's not crushing your resource generation, which is its own problems, then you will be able to do a lot of damage. So that is how damage works in the game. Now, again, I will give my opinion here right at the end. I don't think this is the greatest itemization system because it forces things like crit and vulnerable. It just makes it so you're just always having to run that, right? Like, no matter what, that just becomes kind of required. Additionally, I think having 20 affixes or 30 affixes or whatever number that are just damage versus CC, damage versus close, damage versus distant, damage versus elite, damage versus healthy, damage versus immobilized, damage versus injured, blah, 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 I think is kind of boring in the itemization overall. I really wish that they would compact this and adjust this and make the itemization. Yeah, you agree? Different. You good over there? You're good? Anyways, Darcy agrees. She's not a fan. But that is how it works right now. So that is kind of the way that you need to kind of build if you really want to get your damage up. And yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Hopefully this helps some of you guys out. Mwah! There may be a couple tiny errors in this. Again, we don't have everything fully figured out, and maybe I explained something a little bit wrong. I hope not. But that should at least give you a pretty good idea. Peace, YouTube. Have a good one. I'll see you guys next time.